Welcome to the Calm Cockpit Podcast, the podcast that discusses the personal challenges of being a pilot and provides an actionable path forward for performance and cognitive improvement, with some stories mixed in, of course. I'm John Niehaus.
I'm Geeta Brown. Today we welcome Tammy Barlette, the founder and CEO of Crosscheck Mental Performance Training. In today's episode, we cover using mental performance training to achieve our aviation goals, the perils of perfectionism and negative self-talk, with real-world examples from both military and civilian flying.
Onyx 1-2 Mike Oscar, runway 27, clear for takeoff.
Tammy Barlette retired from the Air Force in 2018 after 20 years of dedicated service. During her last assignment, she was an instructor pilot in the T-38 Talon, the Air Force's primary trainer for the fighter-bomber aircraft track. In addition to the T-38, Lieutenant Colonel Barlette has flown the T-37 Tweet, the A-10 Warthog, the MQ-1 Predator, and the MQ-9 Reaper. She is also a graduate of the prestigious U.S. Air Force Weapons School. She has more than 3,000 total flight hours and over 1,500 hours of combat support time in both Iraq and Afghanistan, supporting and protecting our troops on the ground by providing real-time reconnaissance and lethal support. Born and raised in Minnesota and now residing in Tucson, Arizona, Tammy is married and is mother to beautiful 3 children. And upon retiring, she has entered the world of professional speaking and is the founder and CEO of Crosscheck Mental Performance Training. Welcome to the Calm Cockpit, Tammy.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We're so happy that you're here. So you acquired so many skills in the Air Force. We could probably do 5 shows about the skills alone you acquired in the Air Force. But clearly, you had some deep impulse to serve beyond the Air Force in the whole mental performance training, which led you to create Crosscheck, a mental performance course. What was that deep burning desire that led you to kind of ball up all of those skills and create Crosscheck?
Well, it's multifaceted, and there's two main reasons I decided to start it. The first was as I was moving into the world of professional speaking and crafting my keynote was all about perseverance. But in order to talk to an audience and help them understand, like, how did I do what I did? Not just tell a story, but help them understand how they could do it too. I had to dissect how I did what I did. And I realized that I'd been using the techniques found in mental performance training and actually even teaching a lot of them without even realizing while I was at pilot training instructing. So that's the second piece. While I was at pilot training, my first assignment was an instructor in pilot training in the T-37, and then I ended my career as a full-time reservist for over 6 years flying the T-38 and instructing in that. And what I discovered was that it was really difficult to teach the student the stick and rudder and skills that was my primary job if their head was in their own way. So I spent a lot of time getting into their mind and helping them open up their mind and get themselves out of their own way so they could really truly learn the skills. And that's when I was like, yeah, more people need to know this, because oftentimes what I felt was there was some instructors who were like, well, that, the student has it or they don't, and I completely disagree. Like, if you're talking about confidence or mindset, it can be taught, but you have to know how to teach it. You can't just tell someone, hey, you need to not worry about failure. Hey, you need to get over your anxiety. You have to teach them how. And that's missing in the cockpit, I think.
I think that's missing in a lot of education. I mean, it's no small coincidence that we basically have 3 educators here having this conversation.
Right.
You had resistance then from maybe some fellow instructors. Did you encounter any resistance from the students themselves?
Well, when I was teaching in the 38.
Correct.
They didn't really, I don't think they knew I was doing it, really.
You're just that much of a psychological ninja that you just get in there.
Actually, what it was there was two parts of it. When I was instructing, I would use those techniques to kind of, modify my instruction to help them. Because I really believe that the instructor needs to modify their instructor and their instructing versus the student modifying how they learn. And so that's an extra challenge that's added to an instructor's plate. If you're willing to take it on, you can absolutely teach better and faster and more safely. So that was one way I used it. I used it for myself. But what I did was I was teaching this class to all the students before they went into pilot training. On my own, I just said, hey, can I teach this class? I know they don't have a lot of time, but it was a class that it was confidence and chair flying. And so it was funny because I was teaching this whole class on how they needed to be confident, even if they didn't quite believe in themselves yet. And then talking about how a lot of them had never felt failure. And aviation is a place where you will eventually feel some sort of failure. And if you're not used to it, you don't know how to handle it. And you need to be ready for that. And so we would talk about that. And then I would teach them how to chair fly, because I think that chair flying is something that so many instructors are like, go chair fly. And the student on the other side of the table is kind of like, okay, they said that, like I should know what it is. So I'm just going to pretend I know, and I'm going to walk away and like use my fake cockpit and stare at this, pretend I'm pushing buttons. Yes. There's multiple ways to do it. But I think and just to be clear, because we're talking about mindset and mental performance training, I believe that there's chair flying, which is procedural. And then there's visualization, which is more the visualizing it, how you want to feel, how, the confidence that goes with it as you do the maneuver. You might not push all the buttons every time you do the visualization type, but I believe there's two different sets to that.
I love the idea of teaching confidence, though. Having struggled with that as a student myself, but then also teaching students that have had those same issues, confidence is kind of a amorphous blob, though. So, like, how does that work? What kind of techniques do you use to try to sort of increase something that so often we can't really even quantify ourselves?
Right. Absolutely. You're right. It's hard to get a handle on. Well, first of all, I've used this a lot in my life, but I use the confidence other people have in me, which sometimes people say, no, you need to be confident yourself. Well, absolutely you do. That's a temporary state. But when you've never done something before and you're the kind of person who's like, well, I haven't done it, so I can be confident in it. Well, okay, well, that's not where you're going to get confidence right now. Mm-hmm. So you can use other people's belief in you. I mean, even the belief in yourself that you can, to start off. You don't want to stay there. You don't want to stay in this false confidence place. You want to actually build the confidence. And you're asking, how do you do that? Well, there's lots of different ways, but one of the things is not to just have outcome-based goals, like just the end result. You want to have process-based goals along the way, things to help you feel successful. So you recognize the small goals along the way. So that's one thing. You want to note things like, where did you put a lot of effort? Even if you didn't have a success that day, did you work really hard? So that gives you like, yes, okay, I worked really hard. I'm progressing. I might not have actually made a progression, but that's effort is significant when it comes to confidence and success. Then obviously there's the actual successes. And then there is, effort, progress, and then the progress. So for example, let me give you an example. Let's say there's a cross-country runner who has a goal of their outcome-based goal is to hit a PR on their run. If they don't hit that PR, are they a failure? They should lose all their confidence, right? Absolutely not. But if you don't set any other goals along the way, then you might feel like an utter failure if that's the only thing you're banking on. So things like for the runner, it would be things like tracking, like I put all my effort into workouts. I hydrated, I ate, I slept well. I did all the things I need to do. So at least I can feel good about the work I put in. And eventually it will come, even if that ultimate success does not come. So that is one way to build the confidence. The other thing is, and I say this in my keynote, you need to get in the zone. When you decide you have a goal you want to do, so let's say you want to get your wings, you want to get your private pilot license, whatever it is you want to do, then you set that goal, you decide, you shut the door, you don't go back to the decision-making process, and you adopt a no-quit mentality. I like to say, my philosophy is I will fail out before I bail out. So I decide, like, quitting's not an option. If that comes into my mind, I acknowledge it because it's going to happen. You're going to think about that. Dismiss, acknowledge, dismiss. But the second thing is you have to believe that you can. And the reason I say this, and because that sounds very kind of cheesy, right? Oh, I believe I can. But our brains have something called a reticular activating system where we cannot gather all the data around us. So your brain is going to pull in, your subconscious specifically is going to pull in the data that supports what you believe. So let's use the example of a child who's told once that they're really bad at math. So now they believe this. And what's going to filter in their brain is all the things that validate that, in fact, they are bad at math. So here you are as a pilot. I'm really bad at landing. Someone tells you that, or you think that. You're going to filter in your brain all your crappy landings. Whereas if you say, no, I can land. I just had some rough ones. I can land. And then your brain will start to pick up the things that validate that you are, in fact, you can land the plane well. So those two things. I know it was a lot, but there's a lot to it.
No, I think that's wonderful. And part of what I hear you saying too, Tammy, is it's this notion of how we talk to ourselves is very important. And you're coming from a yoga background and a music background, I would very often hear, well, that's very airy-fairy. And I'm like, no, incorrect. That's actually hard science, particularly to your point of that reticular activating system, that our brains are constantly scanning the environment for what we've already preconceived we're going to find. So we should be very careful what we put in there. I think you even say in your course that we want our subconscious on our side. And I loved that quote because so many people, I think we get bossed around by our subconscious, but we don't realize that that's actually what's happening.
Right.
So along with all of these positive self-talk and, really programming your brain towards the positive, I know you also mentioned in your course meditation.
Mm-hmm.
And meditation, as someone who teaches meditation, I wish I had a nickel for every time that someone either told me I can't meditate or it didn't work for me or any other number of resistances that their minds have thrown up into their thing. So I love if you could talk a little bit about for yourself, maybe some of your own bias that you had in the beginning, just your own discoveries with it. And then also now teaching it, because those are two very different things. You've become a convert and now you're teaching it. So, but I think meditation is a very underserved, very underused tool for us in modern society to actually understand the power of our brain and to everything you were just speaking to.
Right. There's a lot to that, but I will try and simplify it. So back when I was younger, my dad was an Aikido, and I don't know if he meditated, but he was definitely in that group of people who were probably more forward thinking with that. And I thought that's just weird. Yeah, I'm just being honest because that's where I came from. And then I got a little older and more people are meditating and then the science starts coming out that it's valuable. And I thought, okay, there's science behind this. This is smart. And I understood that it mattered, but I thought, I can't do it. My mind goes 1,000,000 miles an hour. I have the worst time even just sitting down. Like I cannot stop. And so I thought I can't do it. There's no way I can do it. And then I took this course and the way the woman described it was incredibly valuable to me because she said, meditating is not stilling your mind. I mean, maybe that will be what happens, but that it doesn't mean you're not meditating if your mind is all over the place. So the way she described it, and I thought it was beautiful, was, whatever your focus point is, whether it's a mantra or breathing or whatever it is, that's your focus point. And then when your mind wanders, if you catch it and you bring it back, you're still meditating. Like you can see how you're practicing control of your mind. And this applies in the cockpit too. The more you apply this on the ground, the more access you have to it in the air to bring your mind back to where you want it to be, not where it's just going. So that's why this practice is good. But what I learned was that she said, if you wander away, you start thinking, I got to do the grocery list, I got to do whatever. And then you acknowledge that you wandered away and you keep going. Now you're not meditating. And I thought, so if I catch myself and come back, I'm still meditating. And what's funny is some days I go back, I wander away and 1,000,000 times or for a long time before I catch myself. And some days I'm very focused. But what I love about it is it reminds me of if you've ever seen an image of a computer defragging, it's like has all these boxes that are these cubes that are all different colors, and they're all like a Rubik's Cube messed up. And then it reorganizes it so everything looks, all the colors are together, and this cube looks much more like just, I don't know, symmetrical and even what?
Uniform.
There's the word. Yes. But that's what I think of when I think about the importance of meditation. It's a good visual for me because as someone who is always on the go, and never wants to sit down, I know that, hey, sometimes you just need to sit down and defrag. Just do it.
I love that. One of my original meditation teachers would call it also taking out the garbage. She's like, take out your garbage every day. Don't let it pile up in your mind, which was the same sort of idea that our brains actually do require structured rest in order to process all the experiences they've had. And I think particularly as someone who's coming to flying at midlife, when I already have, full career, a house, the chickens, the dogs, the husband, the whole, notice that husband was way down on that list. Sorry, hubby. But, wedging aviation in there, that's a big ask for a middle-aged brain to now take everything that it knows and now correlate all this new information with flying against everything that I've learned previously. And so for me, meditation has been very helpful to give the brain that literally defragging, I have a new word for it, that processing time to sort of sort and categorize. Do you get much resistance when you teach meditation in your courses?
I don't give a lot of opportunity to verbalize the resistance.
I love that.
I love it. It's twofold. One, because the actual instruction of it is recorded. So, but in the recording itself, it's not like stop and do this when you have time. It's literally like if they let it play, we're going right into it. And I actually have the quiet time right there. So a lot of people are like, oh, I'm so glad you did that, because I probably would have said, I'll do it later. And then I wouldn't actually do it. But I'm so glad you just included it in the recording. And so I do that. But the other thing I do is at the beginning of class, I do just a 1-minute reset. And the way I like to explain this is that if you were to go on a trip, let's say, you're going from the beach to the mountains back to back, and you walk in the door to repack your bag, and I say, nope, we're going to the mountains and you got to take what you got. And it is what it is. You'd be like frustrated and thinking, are you serious? I don't have what I need. I have stuff I don't need. And I think that that's kind of how people go through life mentally, is they're taking that baggage from one thing into it's like kind of streaming it across those two events instead of just pausing for 1 minute to shut out whatever just happened, reset, and bring your mind to this moment. Because I know that if I don't do it, I'm sitting in my new place going, did I kind of close up what I just did? And did I get everything done? And now I'm not really either place, not benefiting anything. So I force them to do it at the beginning of class. We just do it.
Well, and that effect can last a long time. I mean, it's the same as having let's say an instrument student who busted their private pilot check ride, and now they're convinced that every check ride moving forward, they're going to bust too. And trying to get them to compartmentalize that was its own situation, and you've learned, you've grown, you've done these things. Let's take this for what it is. So not to restate what you just said, but it applies absolutely to aviation. And I know for a fact, because frankly, I'm kind of one of those people. I did bust my private pilot check ride, and that still lasts with me, despite having, tried to forget some of those things, because it is a confidence issue, back to kind of your original point. And one of the actionable steps that I learned, and it sounds kind of hokey, but it goes back into your sort of self-talk idea. Somewhere down the line, many years ago, I heard about this technique where you basically take yourself into the bathroom or your bedroom, wherever you might have a mirror, and you just you have to stare at yourself in the eyes, and you have to use your own name. It's not even like, you can't say you can do this. It's John, yes, you can do this. John, you can pass this check ride. John, you can fly this flight. And there is that sort of funny effect in your brain where you kind of get a little bit of tingles, and you're like, yeah, I can do this. And you go in and hopefully you rock whatever it is that you're trying to do. But I now do that in between recurrence and new check rides, type ratings, and it helps me. I don't know if it helps anybody else, but back to that sort of positive self-talk, it works.
Yeah. And it's important. I mean, one of the things you even mentioned, it's got to be positive. Like, can't be, you're not going to bust this check, right? It shouldn't have that negative word. Always be that you can. And in the present form, right? I can do this, or I am passing. Like sometimes people, one of the benefits is before you even go in, you say, I am a private pilot, or I am a qualified instrument pilot. Like, so telling your brain that you are this thing before you get to it is interestingly beneficial to your brain. And these techniques, they're so simple. I mean, they're so simple. Actually, I had one of my students call me, asked if she could call me after the course. And most people, I don't give them my phone number, but she called me just to say thank you, that she thinks about the course every single day. And she was waiting for the magic to happen in the class. She was like, where's the magic? And she said, and then I realized it was what you said in the beginning, that it's a lot of tiny little things that are very simple. Mm-hmm. But if you don't think about doing them and you don't invest in these simple little things, then you're not going to get the benefit. I mean, and you really, you have to put in the work. And she just said, thank you for highlighting that,
This is where I can give an absolute plug for your course. I've been doing the slow drip method to it, just due to some personal life issues. But I think I have one more unit to complete. And I have little Post-its all over the place with some of these techniques that you've talked about today, like the ESP one and some of the other ones. Little Post-its around just to remind me to do these techniques, because they are most of them take, I don't know, a minute, maybe 2 minutes. Mm-hmm. But it's that repetition of doing them, and like the recage technique. But I have these little Post-its everywhere, because you're absolutely right that it's these small actions done over time with enthusiasm and with belief that you can achieve it, that quite literally we know now through the neuroscience that we are rewiring our brains for success, right, and to have the best possible outcome we can have, because sometimes there are things beyond our control. But we know that we have done our due diligence as pilots to have what's in between the two, the knots on the sides of our heads, to have all of that as clear and as powerful as we can have it, which is why I think your work is so important. And as a yoga nerd, all of this makes me so happy, because I think I can look back to some of the earliest texts where other human beings wrote down ideas like this for other human beings. I'm thinking of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, which is just the oldest surviving writings that we have, or the paper survived. And literally, human beings back then were dealing with the same problems, the same issues. And a lot of what we're talking about today, they said the same things. If you want to have a more calm mind, do small things every day over a long period of time. It's literally like one of the third things that they wrote down. So I feel like these are notes that we human beings have been leaving for each other for a long time. And I'm really happy that you're sort of leading the charge in aviation of really bringing this conversation to the forefront and making it part of training. And I'd love to see it part of primary training across the board. So I have a few questions about that. I know you mentioned in one of your recorded discussion groups in Crosscheck, you mentioned that a first officer for a major carrier reached out to you while they were facing challenges in their training, and you felt very strongly that a specific training method that was being implemented could potentially compromise safety. Could you share what that method was? Why do you think it posed a risk to safety?
Yeah, well, it's a lot of like, memorize these steps. And just, that's what we need you to do. We just memorize all these steps, all these flows, all these things. And I understand that is that's the quickest way to get many people through, is just have them memorize the stuff and get through it. And I understand that. But there's a level of, if you have someone with a lot of flying experience, they're going to go through those eventually, through those flows, and really truly understand the whys behind all the button pushes and switch flips, because that matters. But I think that there's a lot of inexperienced pilots going through, because they're going through these really fast, and they don't have I would say wisdom at this point, the aviation wisdom, to really put the effort in to go, okay, why am I pushing all these buttons? Because there's no time for that, right? It's hard enough to just memorize this flow, let alone what does each switch do. But the thing is that if you don't understand what each of those things does, if your habit pattern gets broken, you get interrupted in the middle of your flow, you don't know where you are, you make potentially major switch errors. And it really bothered me that there was no actual understanding. The effort on the understanding was all like, just memorize this stuff and just get through it. And I thought, I mean, I get that we need more pilots out there, but well, not all the pilots are going to put their own effort into that foundation that they need. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I was one of them. I went through airline training back in 2015, I think it was. That was my first type rating. And I have to say the airline training that I went through, the company I worked for, it was good training, but you're absolutely right. I mean, the flows, it's one thing to know what the button switch does. And they do teach you that because that's on your check ride. It's understanding what this button does in conjunction with the next button.
Yes.
Or in conjunction
there
with
you go.
For it.
Yeah. We were taught that too. There was a lot of things that I look back and I'm like, man, if I really had an issue with that, I don't know if I would have done it right. So it comes from experience. I'm not just saying this and judging from the outside and looking in. I'm saying it from being on the receiving end going, there are definitely times that I was like, I don't have time to memorize all that goes behind this. I just need to memorize the flow and just do it. But eventually there needs to be that understanding. I mean, just like I teach in the course that you can't memorize all your publications. I mean, I know we don't actually have publications like paper anymore, but let's say we did, because you do have them. They're just electronic. You can't memorize everything, but there's a lot of value in knowing which publication, which regulation you look for which data, so that when you're called upon to find the information, you're actually less stressed out about it because you go, well, I don't know the answer, but I know that it's in this, in this regulation, in this chapter, and I can look it up. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because the same kind of concept, the time it takes you to go, okay, I'm going to memorize these regulations, like what's in this regulation specifically, not everything that's in it, but what is it generally for? And do that. And then once you do that, then what is the specific regulation? What's in each chapter? So like in our manual, one chapter is systems, one chapter is emergencies, and so I would know where to look. And now it takes time to do that. And a lot of times people don't want to waste the time because they're like, I don't have time for that. The problem is you don't not have time. Does that make sense? You really need to do that.
Yeah.
You really have to, because it'll make everything way better as you move forward instead of always wondering, do you know it well enough?
So, Tammy, if you had, let's say you're on the phone with a first officer and they're having, not a meltdown, but they're having a bit of overload. It sounds like I'd love to know, what would you tell them about how to approach specifically these flows? But then also, part 2 is, in a perfect world, if you could design the training, how would it be changed so that that's not even an issue for them? Because right now it sort of sounds like they're putting it on the candidates to figure it out, sink or swim. And aviation has such a great track record of safety, right? That other industries are modeling themselves after it. So for someone like me who's new to it, I'm like, there are chinks in the armor. I'd love to hear your opinion on how those things more systematically could be addressed. But then also, I want to just talk to the first officer listening today who's like, Tammy, help me. What do I do?
Yeah. Well, we definitely have a good track record. I just, there's always ways to improve it. So don't get me wrong in thinking that this is not there's not good things about it. There's wonderful things about the way we do things as pilots and that other industries can learn from. But back to your question. So this first officer calls me. What I first do is I spend a lot of time, I'll just use this example. I spent a lot of time listening. And this pilot had taken a lot of notes on their mistakes. And so I was listening to the mistakes and kind of listening for trends. And it was clear to me that they didn't really understand, and that's where this kind of comes from. They didn't really understand why they were pushing certain buttons, because there was, you missed this switch and you didn't do that and you missed that. And I was thinking, know there's a checklist, and I know we're trying to memorize it. So then we're not really looking at the checklist. We're trying to memorize a check. I remember as a student, I would run my checklist and then I'd pretend I was looking at it because there's no way my brain could process that data as fast as they wanted me to do the checklist. So I was just like looking at it. Yeah, I'll run my finger down the paper. I'm literally probably just breathing, not even seeing the data. That's not good either. But I basically was trying to figure out where the issue was. And I think there was so much stress on getting this flow down that the lack of understanding when this pilot got interrupted was that's what I was, again, I just listening to where the problem was. And then the stress of missing. So here you go, you get in that stressful situation. And I would say that a lot of times when we're under massive stress, it's like we don't have access to all of our brain. It's only like half of it. So when I give my keynote, I talk about how when I was first in pilot training and they teach us the aviate, navigate, communicate, I thought, well, that's silly. That seems logical to me. You're going to make me memorize this. But I'm so grateful because I've used it in those moments when I was way overloaded. I went, okay, aviate, fly the freaking plane. Like I have to fly first, which sounds really silly. But when you're massively under stress, you're not sure what's going on with the aircraft. Your brain wants to push buttons like to talk to people. And that's the last thing you need to be doing, because if you crash while you're talking to someone, it doesn't matter. Like fly the plane, make sure you're at a safe airspeed, you're not hit the ground, anything attached to the ground or another aircraft. And only once that is done, then you figure out where you're going. And you got to ignore comment, all that, like there's just, your brain does not have all that information. It doesn't have access to everything. So we have to recognize that. And I think one of the biggest things I can teach people, if you kind of want to shift this back towards mindset and mental performance, is preparing with how you want to respond under challenging circumstances. And I'm talking, so you put yourself in a situation that scares you, go through it in detail, step by step, what you would do, to include how you want to think, feel, and respond. Because even if that particular challenge doesn't come your way, and you've prepared many of these challenges, even if it's some new challenge, if you've thought about how you want to think, feel, and respond, and actually imagined it, you are much more likely to do it. You'll stay more calm. Granted, you're still going to be stressed out, but you'll have access to more of your brain because you've thought through how you want to approach this, no matter what the challenge is.
Wow. That's I think that should just be dropped everywhere. You want to think, feel, and respond. And so that comes back to the visualization you were talking about earlier. That would be a visualization one where you'd actually put yourself in, let's say I'm, single pilot, I'm flying my Piper Warrior, my first cross country solo, and engine out, and all the restart techniques don't work. And I know I have to do an off-field landing. So it sounds like you're saying I'd want to do, I'm not asking for free training here, except I am. But you're saying
no, it's fine. I'm here to help.
No, but you'd say I want to do a visualization that puts me right in that situation where I've decided I'm putting her down in that field right there. And I'd want to do the visualization so intensely that I can feel the elevated heart rate, that I can feel possibly the diminished ability to really focus on anything other than flying the darn plane. And in that moment, intentionally cultivate how I want to think, how I want to feel, and how I want to respond. So that way, when I'm under pressure, that part of my brain goes, oh, I've done this before. It accesses that file drawer of experience and it fires those neural pathways. And then I have that ability to respond at my fingertips. What I find so interesting about all this, Tammy, is you talk a lot about feelings, which I had a total maybe I had my own ideas of what aviators were and all of that. But I've heard you say today and in the course as well that how we feel and how we think about how we feel actually does matter. Is that accurate? Am I hearing you correctly?
You are hearing me right. Yeah. And I think a lot of times when people talk about being emotional or feelings, we want to think about, oh, you were crying, or oh, but there's way more feelings than just that. There's the whole mantra of, or I don't know if it's a mantra, saying there's no crying and flying, and there's you can't feel anything. This is not what I'm talking about, because we all have feelings. And one of the best ways to kind of get people to understand how this matters is, I like to say that I talked a little bit already about a fail up before you bail out mentality, like a no quit
Mhm.
mentality. So if you set a goal based on your own personal core values, and if you don't know your own personal core values, go find a book, figure them out, because it really helps guide the path of your life in a direction that makes sense for you. But anyways, that's not the topic here. You set a goal based on your own personal core values. You set yourself down the path. Nothing major changes, and the challenges exceed your expectations, which they almost always will if they're worth it. That's when you're going to start getting emotional. And meaning like, can I do this? Maybe I took the wrong path. And things are going to rise up in you. And that's the moment you go, okay, that's a cue to you. Whenever you have feelings, I would say positive or negative, you got to go, what's triggering this? Because oftentimes people will get these feelings and they'll take that as a sign they're on the wrong path. And that's not what it is at all. You need to that's where I say I develop a no quit mentality. I am not going to, the decision-making phase is a phase, and I shut the door, because once I get emotional about something, I'm not going to change it. I make that decision intentionally. And that applies across the board, right? We need to understand how our feelings are impacting us. One of the other things I like to talk about is how we actually have to process our emotions about things. Oftentimes people want to they just shove it down and they think that it's going to go away. But like a little kid in a scary movie who covers his eyes and says to himself, he can't see me. When the bad guy walks in the room, he can't see me. And you're like, that's not even logical. Like, kid, what? We do that with our emotions too. We're like, oh, they're gone. Like, that's not a problem. Well, they're still there. You know what? And you have to acknowledge these emotions and these feelings, or they will rise up and they can take over. I like to call them the enemies within. And you have to recognize your own enemies that are inside of you. You can't battle an enemy you don't understand. And if you're not trying to recognize your enemy, it can take over. So simple little things like going home and processing through whatever emotions. Let's say you had a failure that day. You struggled with something. Well, it doesn't define you. It just gives you information about the situation. It's not who you are, but let it out. Like, if you want it, like my instinct intellectually was to get in the books and study, fix this failure. Well, I had done a lot of that. I needed to get rid of the emotion that was the baggage that I carried with it because of this struggle or failure. And so something in my gut always told me to just don't get in the books right now. You need to just let it out. And however you do that, it's different for everyone. Maybe you journal. Maybe you talk to someone. Maybe you cry. Maybe you punch something, not someone. Workout. I don't know, but you have to process it. Otherwise, it's like running around. It's like going into a race with a weight vest on. Don't do that. Take the freaking weight vest off and then start processing through that struggle again, because you will progress more quickly and more effectively if you get rid of that, process through those emotions. So emotions matter big time because they give you clues of what's going on and where you need to focus.
So here's a question, and this is asking for a friend. It's me. You want to talk about the enemy within. So here's a more specific example. I mean, we are pilots and we are notoriously perfectionists. Geeta likes to say she's a recovering perfectionist. I'm still, hi, my name is John. I am a perfectionist. And being a flight instructor made me a significantly better pilot, and I've used it throughout my career. The unfortunate thing I think I've noticed is that it's also made me a lot more cognizant of my own errors, because when you're so used to grading somebody else, you start grading yourself, and you grade yourself twice as hard as you grade any of your students, despite knowing like, oh yeah, it's okay. I'll give you an example. So I used to really struggle with engine failures on takeoff in a jet. And it was something I was always afraid of on my check rides. It always went fine, but it was like, oh man, I got to do this. Oh, I'm in training. I got to do this. And being very understanding of, okay, the ACS says that you can only have this much heading deviation and runway centerline deviation. And I remember I was in training one day and I did a V1 cut, and I just kind of went, okay. And the instructor looked at me and he goes, I don't understand. What's wrong? I said, I had this and I had that and I had this and I had that. And he kind of looked at me and he's like, dude, you need to let me grade you because I'm your instructor, not you. And then he did something that still kind of sticks with me. He did a printout and it showed my line against the center line of the runway. And he goes, I want you to go home and just hang this on your fridge. I know you're like 30 something, but just go hang this on your fridge. And he goes, look at the number at the bottom and the deviation from the center line. And I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but it was like 2.5 feet. It was good. And I kid you not, I looked at him and I said, yeah, but that's 2.5 feet. And he just kind of goes, just accept the win, man. So I guess that's a long-winded way of asking, like, what are your thoughts on dealing with sort of that self-critical perfectionism that just affects so many of us? Even when things are good, we're still like, but it wasn't perfect.
Well, you're using so much brain power to be perfect that you're not using this brain power for things that you really need to be using it on. You understand? So when we did this, and I'm a recovering perfectionist myself, and I'll talk about that in a second, but we're Oshkosh and this summer, community aviation, and I had to have my workshop had to have like an aviation part of it where they were flying the simulator. And so what I had them do is the first time I had them do a steep turn, I told them you could not have any deviations. This must be absolutely perfect on altitude, on roll heading, on exactly bank, and of course they were like, what? And I'm like, no, this is what we're doing. And then I said, okay, this second one had, acceptable deviations that make sense, right? So have you ever watched a student who's trying to hold altitude so precisely that they're not looking at whatever else they're, maybe they're supposed to be checking their fuel, but they're so focused on getting this perfect altitude. It doesn't make sense. I mean, we want perfection, but it doesn't make a lot of sense, especially in aviation. So when I became an instructor, I actually embraced my imperfections more versus going, oh my gosh, look at these errors. Because what I realized is I would brief my students and I would say, hey, here's the deal. There is no perfect flight. And the only difference between you and me is how big the mistakes are and how long, you hold them. That's it. I make them too. Mine are just smaller and how often they happen probably. But we all make mistakes. And I would talk through that when I was flying. If I made an error, I would talk them through it as well. So they could see, hey, oh, this is okay. And that's the best way for you as an instructor to help them not be a perfectionist. Highlight where hey, don't be so like on altitude, like you said, on center line. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about this. When I was a little kid, my mom would introduce me as her little perfectionist. And I was so proud of that. And I thought it was a good thing. I'm like, oh, yay. But oh my gosh, as an adult, especially in this, what I'm learning now with mental performance training, perfectionism is so bad. It is so bad for us. And I like to say, strive for perfection. Like you can have that lofty goal. I'm not asking you to lower your standards, but on the back side of it, don't be a perfectionist. Like, again, have the lofty goal, but on the backside, when you make the mistakes, use it as information, not as a definition of who you are as a pilot, as a person, as a whatever athlete, whatever. Because they say the highest achievers in any given field are only moderate perfectionists. And those with the highest level of perfectionism are only moderate achievers because the anxiety they feel over making a mistake stops them from taking timely action or focusing on the wrong thing.
Yes.
Do I need to say that again? Do you want me to say that again?
I would actually, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. The highest achievers in any given field are only moderate perfectionists. And those with the highest levels of perfectionism are only moderate achievers because the anxiety they feel over making a mistake stops them from taking timely action or focusing on the right thing.
Amen.
I feel like I need to tattoo that on my forehead.
Don't worry, John. We'll have a birthday gift coming for you that has that. I had
a 33,000 hour CFI take the course, and he gave it to himself for a birthday present. He was hesitant, but he said it was the best birthday present he ever gotten. And I still get messages from him about things he's learned about himself. He's like, I'm so grateful. I was trying to do everything perfectly. And there's so many little notes he sends me. And it's so awesome to be able to help people like that. It's so great. He was a perfectionist, and he realized how bad it was.
But we think we're doing the right thing by being perfectionist, right? Whatever our internal motivation is, whether it is to get the accolade, in my case, it was to get the accolades from other people so that I would feel like I had a sense of place. You know, I grew up in a family of PhD scientists, and here I was a very artistic kid. So I always had that, you know, we pick up a lot of this when we're pre-verbal. We just sort of, you know, create that idea, oh, I don't belong here, so I better spend the rest of my life proving that I belong everywhere, until I got old enough and wise enough to go, oh, we can discard that limiting belief. But we all carry these limiting beliefs around. And I think our motivations for perfectionism might be altruistic, even wanting to help people or wanting to do a good job or wanting to feel safe and secure financially, whatever measure that is. But when we hit that reality check, like you just said, that it's actually not doing what we think it's doing, that's when we have to be honest about it and say it's not producing the outcome that we're looking for. So you talk about mindfulness in your course, and you actually have a great definition of it that I thought was so succinct. It's being present in the moment without judgment. Mindfulness to you define it as being present in the moment without judgment. So for many of us aviators, many of us high performers across all careers, we look at judgment as our friend because that's how we know we're doing a good job, right? John, you're on center line.
Yes.
You know, Geeta, I taught so many classes this week. I have so many students going off to music school. I am a success. But if we're being present in the moment without judgment, I hear people resisting that because they maybe say, well, then I won't do as good of a job because it just means that I don't care. Or I'll be kind of lackadaisical or lazy about it. How are people actually going to achieve their highest level of aviation if they don't have judgment?
Well, I think that judgment and self-criticism are different. Like judgment is very negative. It has like a tone to it, like, oh, I suck. Oh, that, you know, it has this, you know, like, oh, I can't believe I did that. And it's like a negative connotation where, you know, there's nothing wrong with self-criticism. When you're trying to do well at something, you have to figure out what you're doing wrong, right? In order to get better. And that's kind of what you're talking about. But you embrace those mistakes as information. You don't look at them again. We're kind of hitting back to this, like, is this mistake going to define you, or is this mistake going to inform you? So I'll share this. This is in the course. So if you take the course, you're hearing the story too, but tale of two tail strikes, right? Because this is a really good example. When I built the course, I interviewed a ton of people because I wanted to make sure I was on the mark for what people needed. And I asked I asked everybody, but these two particular pilots, I said, okay, what was your biggest mistake? Pilot A says, oh, I had a tail strike. I can't even believe I did. It was awful. I do on and on. And maybe I shouldn't even be a pilot. It was just so, I mean, it just was kept going. And I was like, oh my. Okay. Pilot B was the worst thing you've ever done. This pilot says, oh yeah, I had a tail strike once. But, I learned that when you do X, Y happens. So I work really hard not to let X happen. So you have pilot A, who is literally defining themselves by this one mistake. Pilot B, who's going, oh, that gave me some information. So that's a significant thing when it comes to struggles and failures, because that's what the judgment is coming in, right? We're judging ourselves for our errors. Errors are information. It helps us figure out what we need to correct. And it doesn't mean that we can't do the thing, But the one thing about flying that I want to highlight is you can't just pull over on a cloud, right? So that's my tagline for my business. You can't just pull over on a cloud. You have to stay mentally in the game. So how do you get over these mistakes? I just made a mistake. And John, you talked earlier about grading yourself. Mm-hmm. I remember in pilot training that they would always tell us that. Don't grade yourself. Don't grade yourself. And I thought to myself, I don't even know what the grades are supposed to be. I'm not going to grade myself because I'm very literal. And so I didn't understand until I did. I was on a check ride. It was not an actual check ride. It was like inside pilot training check ride. And I was doing a fix to fix, which people probably don't even know what that is anymore, but it was horrible. They sucked. They were very stressful. And so here I'm going to this fix, and I turned into holding, and I went, oh my gosh, I just turned the wrong direction in holding. And I couldn't let it go, could not let it go. And because I couldn't let it go, what I learned later was that, so I eventually got to an ILS and then I forgot to put my flaps down. And he's like, are you going to put your flaps down? I'm like, yeah, that would be a good idea. Well, then I knew I actually busted at that point for sure, but I already thought I busted. I got to the debrief and the instructor said to me, it's a Friday. You're my third check ride today. I was thinking that this is the third awesome check ride I have in one day. And then I don't know what happened. But I found out that I turned the correct direction in holding. I mean, granted, it was by chance, I suppose, but because I wouldn't let it go, I was so distracted that I did bust later. But that's when I learned what grading yourself meant.
Yep.
So the quickest way, and I teach this in the course, but the quickest way to get your brain to be in the moment versus going, what did I just do? Or, oh my gosh, what is coming up? Because neither of those places is where your brain needs to be. Is just to say to yourself, what now? What now? What now? Because it forces your brain to think about what in this moment now. It's only 2 words. But if you practice it too, like it's one of those things that your brain will go, okay, let it go,
How did you get like that? See, when I think of the Air Force training, this is not really what I think of. You said you sort of had to go back and deconstruct. So it sounds like a lot of this you came to because you had to in the moment. Was the training sort of the opposite and you filled it in internally with this, or was any of this reflected in the actual training itself?
Some of it. So for me, the military definitely shaped this direction of my life. And to me, it was the first time I was in a place where in my mind, I felt I could not quit. The military is not something you just go walk away from. I'm done. Sorry, this isn't for me. You have to keep going. And you'd be surprised at what you can do when you don't have the option to quit, which is why I have that philosophy of if I make a decision about something I'm going to do, it's based on my own personal core values. I've thought through it and I'm calm, cool, collected. I have all the information. I decide I'm going to do it. When I get emotional and upset about it, when I get in the stress of it, I don't change my mind. That's how I developed that no quit mentality, even if I can quit, because I think that no quitting in the military really grew me and made me see I could achieve way more than I believed. And if you take that out of quitting, you never really see what you can achieve. So that's one thing. But the second thing, when it comes to, we were talking about those, how you want to think, feel, and respond. The Air Force taught me that, and no one would ever be like, wait, they what? They taught you that. I interpreted it that way because we used to do these things called stand-ups when we were in pilot training. And if you're an Air Force pilot, you know how brutal they are. So what happened was it's 0600 time hack boom on the second, everyone's, and we do at the end of this, we do this thing called a stand up where all the instructors are sitting at their desks or on the outside. The students are in like a U shape or in front of their students. There's one instructor at the front and they in detail, they go, okay, it's overcast at 5,000 feet. Winds are 130 at 10. You're at runway 13. You're rolling down the runway and, you just passed 75 knots and you see a red light in the cockpit. You have the aircraft lieutenant at the time, Ward. So I'd stand up with my checklist, my in-flight guide, and at attention, I'm like, Roger, I have the aircraft. I'm going to maintain aircraft control, analyze the situation, take the proper action, land as soon as conditions permit. I'm going to maintain aircraft control by, and I would, and you go through in detail in front of everyone what you would do. And what's interesting about it seemed like hazing at the time, because if you didn't do something right, they would go, Lieutenant Ward, sit down. And that means you're done for the day. Like, you're not flying, you're off the schedule and you're going to study because you're an idiot, or at least how it felt. And then someone else would stand up and they would ask that student, hey, Lieutenant Johnson, do you want to do anything different? Change anything that Lieutenant Ward did? Usually that's a chance for somebody to go, well, but I say it like this because you cannot in the aircraft actually shut an engine down, right? There's lots of things we can simulate, but we all know it's not real. And so that stress isn't the same. But there's something to be said about the massive stress about performing in front of all your peers and all your instructors, which, again, not the same, but very stressful. And it forced you to feel this massive stress and yet maintain your composure. And the reason I say this works is because I was very worried when I thought to myself as a brand new student, when I actually have an emergency, I don't even know do I know if I'm going to do this right? How do I know? Well, because the training was so intense like that, I tell you, there was only one time in all of my career where I didn't just respond like a boom, 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 got this. And I believe it was from the training and from that mindset of I need to perform calm, cool, and collected under pressure because I had practiced it.
That is such valuable training that they gave you. And I'm sure it was by design, right? I mean, it sounds like it was. So I'm wondering how us little GA pilots can practice things like that. If there are a few instructors in the room. Maybe I'll task John with being my interrogator and have me stand up and run through a procedure. Because a lot of this, I think, can really help general aviation pilots. But I think we have to sort of sometimes construct some of it ourselves.
I came across another gentleman. He is a lieutenant colonel in the Army. He flies Blackhawks. And he was at a mental health symposium that I went to, aviation mental health symposium that I went to recently at my alma mater. And he was talking about how the Army was integrating transcendental meditation into their aviation programs. And I say this specifically because for all of those pilots out there that hear something like meditation and yoga and all of that stuff, those, super kind of type A personalities and, I don't need that. That's a bunch of nonsense. When you hear that the Army, the Air Force, the rest of the branches are doing this, it's got to make people go, well, hang on a second. There's got to be something to this, right?
Yeah. You know what? I think one of the best ways to help people understand the importance of this content is there's a sport and performance psychologist named Michael Gervais, and he's one of the best out there. And he says you need to train your mind, your body, and your craft. So I like to say skill set, but like a lot of us will train our craft or a skill set. A lot of time goes into that. Think about it when you're flying, like aviation specifically. We train our bodies, and if we don't, we at least understand that we should. Most people do understand that, but most people don't ever put any intentional effort into their mind. And it is the one thing that elite athletes are learning sets them apart from everyone else who's doing all the same work that they're doing. And so they're investing a significant amount of time and money into mental performance training, and it is not specifically limited just to athletes. It's something everyone can do. And the other thing about it that I think is huge, especially in today's world, is that it is really good for your mental health. So when I like to think about it, we have, if you can picture a spectrum from, one side to the other, on one side, you have a mental health crisis. On the other side, you have optimal mind. And in the middle, you have mental health support. That makes sense, right? So the thing is, though, if you shift that into the medical model, let's say you have you're critically ill on one side, perfectly healthy on the other, and then medical support is in the middle. That's not exactly how it is, right? Because if you're not perfectly healthy, do you go running to the doctor? No, you don't. There's things that you do for yourself before you go to the doctor. So if you go back to that mental health model, there's a gap between medical support and optimal mind. And mental performance training can be shoved in that gap and fill it. Because when I was speaking to the Long Beach Police Department last fall, they said to me, Tammy, we have really great mental health support. But sometimes we're not what you call optimal mind, but we don't quite need mental health support yet. What do? We don't have tools for that. And that's where the techniques used in mental performance training for athletes, which is why I studied that and then shifted it into the cockpit, can be used for everyone. And it'll actually keep people on that right side of the spectrum more mentally healthy. I mean, sometimes we need doctors. Sometimes we need medical support. Sometimes we need mental health support. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But we want to limit that, right? And so not only does mental performance training have that, and training your mind have the benefit of leveling up from wherever you're at already, even if it's a high level, you can go higher, but it also is good for your mental health.
And that is so important. And I know John and I have talked about this, and it's a lot of the reason why the podcast is here, because there is that sort of gap in aviation right now. And I think as the FAA is lurching towards the 21st century with regards to how they view pilots receiving support from mental health counselors and relating to them maintaining their medical certificates. It's very challenging right now. And I think a lot of pilots are hesitant to then go to that more medical model or even talk to a counselor for fear of losing their medical certificate. And I can say for myself, just personally, as being someone who I got into yoga, meditation, all this mental performance training type stuff in high school when I was a high performing musician. I knew that was my career track. I wanted to be on the stage, and it was a lot of pressure, to go off to a boarding school as a 16-year-old kid and say, that's my career. But having experienced now the benefits of having all of these tools moving into adulthood and moving into different adventures like this one, I know for a fact myself how it's helped me to maintain a high level of mental health and awareness. And when I've needed the help, I've gotten it, but it has helped, I think, keep me just this side of sane long enough. But I think it's such a valuable thing, a valuable tool and resources for pilots, aviators of all different types to have. So I am so happy you're doing the work and spreading the word. If there is an ideal student out there, talk to them for a minute. Who are they? Someone who is out there looking for and saying, maybe I'll do Crosscheck.
The ideal student is, first of all, if you understand the power of the mind, or you're curious about the power of the mind and what it can do for you, and you want to level up, or you want to just feel less anxiety or less of a perfectionist, then you are the ideal student. A lot of times people ask me, well, is it just for instructors or is it just for new students? No, the hours you have is irrelevant. If you understand that this can make a difference in aviation, because like I said, you can't just pull over on a cloud, then this class is for you. I've had everyone from 0 hours, grateful students who said, I'm so glad I took this before I started flying, to 27,000 hour instructor pilot who was like, well, not only is this beneficial for me, but I can teach this to my students.
You sort of just touched on it, but again, for those that don't know, what's the 2-minute elevator speech? Tell us about the course. Give us just a quick sort of summary and how does somebody get it if they want to get more information?
Yeah. So the course is basically anyone who wants to, level up mentally their aviation game, and everyone can pretty much do that. It has a focus on how to increase focus, how to decrease anxiety and stress, especially under pressure, how to get over failure and embrace failure versus using it as defining yourself, right? How to avoid being a perfectionist. So if you just want to feel better in the cockpit and more confident, ultimately that's what it's about, called Building Confidence in Aviation. You can go to crosscheckmentalperformance.com. It has all the information there. It's 4 weeks long. It's all virtual. There is a self-paced version. I discourage that. But if that's the only option you have, great. Because the actual synchronous version the classes are actually virtual. You can watch them whenever you want, but we do have a weekly discussion group, and there's a lot of value to be had in the discussion group with, a coach, and then other students sharing that they're feeling the same things, and then learning. There's power in having other students say how they're using the information they're getting in the course. And they're like, oh, wow, I didn't think about doing that. And it kind of builds up and makes everyone learn even more. So I encourage the class with the discussion group.
Awesome. I see so many more of these conversations in the future. And I hope maybe sometime you'll come back on the podcast and you will be reporting that you are meeting in front of the FAA subcommittee on changing the mental health standards, and really, though, moving the needle forward and just making this just part of what aviators do across all levels of training. I think the work you are doing is so valuable in translating a lot of these time-honored strategies that people have used and moving it into an evidence-based model, and then giving it just very simple, concrete things people can do every day is just of enormous benefit. So I know I've been very grateful to take your course. I will finish it. Yes, I will. Failure is not an option. I have made that decision that I will do it. And whether it takes me 6 months or not, it just gets done. But this work is so valuable and so appreciated. And I know I am very grateful that you came on the podcast today.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you for having me. And, speaking, you mentioned FAA. I should let everyone know that you get FAA Wings credit for taking the course.
Nice.
And attending my keynote. So
bonus.
They're supportive. They're heading in that direction. They're very supportive. I'm constantly in contact with the FAA safety team. So it's been great.
Fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. I love the wings program. I'm not even a fully certificated pilot yet, but I take all the wing stuff because I love to get the credit for it.
Yep. I think it's a good amount of credit too.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. John, did you have any other questions? Anything we missed?
No, I think we ran the gamut of questions, and Tammy, just like Gita said, really appreciate your time today. I know I learned a ton. Asking for a friend. But I think people will get a lot out of this episode, and hopefully, again, for those that are interested, it's crosscheckmentalperformance.com, correct?
Correct. Crosscheckmentalperformance.com.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I appreciate the support.
Thanks for listening to the Calm Cockpit Podcast. Make sure to follow and subscribe in your favorite podcast player. Find us on social media at The Calm Cockpit Podcast, or drop us an email at calmcockpit@gmail.com. Thanks much, and as always, fly smarter and stress less.
Departure is Airbus 321. Traffic holding across the runway 33 left, 3 left.